Yes, my friends, something is changing behind the scenes in Baltimore, and we need to talk about it because this could completely change the way we look at the Ravens' offense. We all know this team has carried the same reputation for years. Baltimore simply doesn't value wide receivers enough. But now Zay Flowers just said something that caught my attention. After receiving his new contract, Flowers made it clear that things are changing, and man, that could be huge for Lamar Jackson and this offense. At the same time, Rashad Bateman sounds more excited than we've heard him in a long time because Declan Doyle is moving him around and giving him a chance to show more of his talent. So I want to know which side you're on. Do you believe this new approach can finally unlock Bateman and completely change this Ravens receiver room? Or do you still need to see it happen on the field before believing the hype? Write your opinion below. And if you've been a Baltimore Ravens fan for more than 15 years, hit that like button hard. Alright, let's talk about Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, and why something very different may be happening in Baltimore. Now, let's get into this because the comment from Zay Flowers deserves a lot more attention than it has received. When Flowers was asked about the reaction inside the wide receiver room to his new contract, he said everybody was happy and excited for him. But then he added something that really stood out. He basically acknowledged the old belief around Baltimore that receivers were not really valued, and then he said that changed. That is a powerful statement coming directly from one of the most important receivers on this roster. For years, Ravens fans have heard the same criticism. Baltimore could build a defense. Baltimore could run the football. Baltimore could develop certain positions extremely well. But when the conversation turned to wide receivers, the story was different. There has been a long-running narrative that Baltimore was not the ideal destination for receivers. Whether every part of that narrative was fair or not, it existed, and the players certainly heard it. That is why the Flowers extension means more than simply keeping a talented player in Baltimore. The Ravens didn't just tell Flowers they valued him. They showed him through a major financial commitment. According to the discussion in the source, his new deal puts him among the top 5 contracts at his position. That is something Baltimore simply hasn't done at this level with one of its own receivers. Yes, the Ravens have given second contracts to receivers before. Rashad Bateman received one. Chris Moore technically received another contract from Baltimore as well. But what happened with Flowers is on another level. And Flowers earned the opportunity. Since arriving in Baltimore in 2023, his impact has been significant. He became an important part of this offense, and now the organization is making it clear that it expects that impact to continue growing. Eric DeCosta, Flowers, and Flowers representatives were able to get the deal done, and that sends a message throughout the entire receiver room. Baltimore is willing to invest in one of its own. But this story becomes even more interesting when we move from Flowers to Rashad Bateman. Because while Flowers has received the contract that confirms his place in the Ravens' future, Bateman may be getting something else that he desperately needed, an opportunity to show everything he can actually do. Bateman has always been one of the most debated players among Ravens fans. Some fans strongly believe in him. Others have lost confidence. That debate isn't new, and it isn't going away because of a few practices or comments during the offseason. But listen to what Bateman himself is saying about the offense under Declan Doyle. Bateman explained that he has been moving around the formation. He talked about playing in the slot and outside. More importantly, he suggested that in the past he had been used almost like a one-dimensional receiver. Now he feels that his talent is being seen differently. That matters. Bateman specifically praised Doyle for moving the receivers around and playing to their strengths. And he wasn't only talking about himself. He mentioned Flowers moving around. He mentioned Ja'Cory Jacoby-Lane making plays. He mentioned Devontae Walker. Bateman's message was essentially that there could be a lot in store for several receivers because this offense is giving them different ways to display what they can do. For Bateman personally, that could be huge. He said being able to work from the slot and outside is a blessing because it gives him more opportunities to show his talent. And beyond the actual words, there was something noticeable in the way he talked about it. Excitement. Bateman sounded excited about his role. For a player whose career in Baltimore has created so much frustration and debate, that could become one of the most interesting developments of this season. This doesn't guarantee anything. Bateman still has to perform. The offense still has to prove that these ideas work when games actually count. But the opportunity appears to be there. Instead of asking Bateman to remain in one place and perform one narrow job, Doyle appears interested in moving him around and finding favorable situations for him. Flowers is moving around too. Other young receivers are being given opportunities. And suddenly, the Ravens receiver room feels different. Think about the two developments together. Flowers gets paid. Bateman gets moved around. Young receivers get opportunities. The Ravens have resisted the temptation to simply bring in another veteran receiver who could take snaps away from the players already on the roster. That last part is especially important. Throughout the offseason, there was always the question of whether Baltimore would add another established veteran receiver. But according to the discussion in the source, the Ravens kept saying no, and they continued sticking with that decision as the preseason approached. Chris Moore was the veteran addition mentioned, but Baltimore did not make the kind of move that would completely change the hierarchy of the receiver room. Stephon Diggs was mentioned as being with Washington, taking him out of the equation. Keenan Allen and Tyreek Hill were also discussed as veteran names still out there, with Hill's health noted as a factor. But Baltimore's actions suggest it wants to see what this current group can become. That puts even more attention on Bateman, Lane, Walker, and, of course, Flowers. And I think this is where Ravens fans should pay close attention. Because this isn't simply about whether one receiver catches 1,000 yards or another catches 8 touchdowns. This is about whether Baltimore has finally created an offensive environment where its receivers feel like their complete skill sets are being used. Bateman's comments strongly suggest he believes something has changed. And Flowers' comments suggest something has changed organizationally too. One player is talking about being valued financially. Another is talking about being valued through his usage. Those are two different things, but they lead toward the same bigger question. Are we watching the Ravens finally change the way they treat and use the wide receiver position? If the answer becomes yes, the biggest beneficiary could ultimately be Lamar Jackson. Because Lamar doesn't need this offense to become complicated just for the sake of being complicated. He needs an offense that puts talented players in situations where defenses cannot easily predict what is coming. If Flowers can line up in different places, that creates questions for the defense. If Bateman can operate both outside and from the slot, that creates more questions. If Lane and Walker can contribute and earn meaningful roles, now the offense has even more possibilities. And that becomes especially interesting when you combine it with the changes happening across the rest of the organization. There is a new coaching staff. Jesse Minter is the first-year head coach, and the source described how his emphasis on relationships and communication has already been visible throughout the offseason. Declan Doyle is running the offense. And the optimism surrounding the team isn't limited to the receivers. There is also excitement about the defense, especially after what Ravens fans experienced over the previous couple of seasons. One fan in the discussion said he hoped Minter could bring the defense back to elite status and even recreate the type of triple crown from 2023, points allowed per game, sacks, and takeaways. That's obviously a massive expectation. The more reasonable goal is simply to see a great Ravens defense again. A defense that creates turnovers. A defense that makes important stops. A